Welcome, everyone. My name is Rachael Craig-Dunn, and Susan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. Last day of the conference. I'm Susan Nyamora. I think many of you might have heard me speak at the opening session. For this purpose, I'm going to be here as representing a family member across the lifespan.
Thank you. So, welcome to our Resilience Through the Lifespan and Evolving process. When Susan and I spoke about this topic, I decided that this was something I wanted to do because we are experiencing so many things in our community. Susan and I are in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We're based there, and we have four facilities, four locations for South Florida Wellness Network. I run the Federation of Families Broward, which is a chapter of the national and a part of South Florida Wellness Network. So I am going to talk with you and introduce our families. So there I am. I am the Family Program Supervisor for Federation of Families. I have here on the left a little bit about my family. I have my son, who is a young adult, who I started this process over 9 years ago. I came to South Florida Wellness Network as a mom looking for support and assistance to help me with my youth because I was having challenges at that time. And I have to tell you, it was a life-changing experience for me as a parent. And we'll get into a little bit of that further down. But as I said, I came looking for assistance as a mom that didn't know how to navigate certain systems and navigate the challenges I was having with my own son. I also have a beautiful daughter, a mom, a dad, a sister, and a nephew. So those are some photos of my family there. So welcome to my family. Susan?
And as Rachel and I were discussing, my family kind of takes over a big portion of it. I have a lot of children. That also have children, so that, again, the family across the lifespan. But more importantly, I have a very multiracial, multilingual family, with very diverse backgrounds and just a plethora of just love, right? And complexities, and if you look at the pictures I tried to capture, they're all in different places and stages of their life. Some of it is great stages, some of it is challenging stages, some of it is growth stages, and some of it is new life stages. So you see my grandchildren there and expected grandchildren. My last daughter that was also my recovery daughter, who went into college this past summer, and we got to do that whole empty nesting type of deal, but collecting the little ones as we go. But I have a very beautiful, amazing, complicated family. And we just continue to heal and thrive together. So thank you, Rachel, for allowing me to take up a big portion of the slide because it's just something that my family's large. So really
I
appreciate
love that.
introducing
Yeah.
me.
I love that because when I put the pictures up at first, I thought, oh my goodness, I think we're so big, my family, and we're so large. And then when you put yours, I was like, okay, we're large in personality and we're large in culture, but quite a little family. So, but with our families and our, I was thinking, looking through the lens of resiliency into what our families are, where we are in our journey, and where we want to be, right? It's about the journey. So we're going to ask you to connect with us. Think of your loved one that you may be supporting, or a loved one. What stage of life are they in? We want you to put that in the chat.
It sounds like you have a deeply connected and resilient family. Thank you for sharing.
Let's see, are we seeing in the chat? Yes, one daughter's doing well, one son stuck, one's starting a family. 4 of us. Lovely. Son and daughter, okay. Adulthood. That's one we can discuss today. Young adults struggling with transitioning from college to career. Adolescence. Thank you. So we're going to be discussing some of that lifespan today and where we are and what comes with those different ages and stages. Susan?
I apologize. I'm working on a new machine because of technical difficulties. Yeah, I honestly, when I look at this and I look at the chat and I think about the different stages that families are facing, and the beauty behind it, right? Because we know that through the various stages, sometimes there's complexities, but I also think there's opportunity for growth and complete transition. You know, as I shared in the chat myself, you know, I'm also experiencing the grands, right? And I have a 16-year-old grandson who's navigating the unfortunate circumstances of the challenges, right? The challenges of peer pressure, the new world of these wonderful vape pens and discovering themselves and trying to fit in, and really looking at how do I support my son as being a parent without overreaching into their world, but also support the role that I love, because I get to give the grands back to their parents, without kind of debunking the things that my their parents are putting having to have to challenge with, as I've already navigated that because it's different. So I think it's an opportunity for us to really explore and have really open conversations. And to your point, Rachel, when you came to South Florida Wellness Network and helping you to see, you know, because sometimes as parents, when we go up and we share our story, and I hear it a lot when parents are sharing their story, they're the victim of their children. And, you know, it's really hard when we're sharing from that perspective and that lens, because when our children get to hear it, it sometimes can be really hurtful. But really stepping into that space, like I've learned so much on how to support my people. So I really hope that when you go through the various stages with us, as Rachel goes to start outlining them, that you really look at what role you're playing in the stage that your loved one is in.
Yes, thank you for that. That was one of the things that I think was markedly for me coming in as a parent, because yes, when we've gone through a lot, I remember that stage vividly of feeling, you know, you're angry, you're hurt, you're exhausted, you're overwhelmed. Sometimes those feelings are really strong, and sometimes you don't have healthy supports around. And so it comes off like you are the victim, and you're going through these things with your family member. But you know, over the years, I have learned to be able to reframe, and I think that's a you call me the reframe queen, Susan, but I think it's a way that I learned to change the language that I was using as a parent, you know, and not speak about my loved one as a diagnosis or as a challenge or as somebody I had to fix or solve, and just take him as he was, accept him, love him, and try and work on healing together. So that was the beginning of my journey at South Florida Wellness Network 9 years ago, as a parent. And I have to say that a lot has changed in 9 years. So in my lifespan up until now, there's been growth. There has been trauma, but there has been a lot of healing and growth. So let's go. So the objectives of today are really, you know, as we walk through the stages, we're going to talk about the challenges, our skills, the support and resilience that we need. Our objectives are to explore the different stages of the lifespan, right? We're going to talk about the systems of care that that we may encounter as family members and our loved ones may encounter, because they may be different. We're going to discuss some common barriers that we may come across and what we can do in how to learn to advocate, right? Not just self-advocate for ourselves, but to help our youth in learning how to advocate, and our aging parents, if we get to that, to aging parents, and learn some key navigation skills that help us build resilience. You know, some of the buzzwords that we have in our field are recovery capital. And today I was saying to Susan, this presentation is about resiliency and building our resiliency capital, because I think it's something that we really need to work on and to have, and to know that at different stages in our journey, we can build different and use our tools to build more resiliency. So we'll talk about the stages of lifespan, and at the end of each stage, we're going to discuss. You can put things in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll talk about it. So one of the first the stages of the lifespans that we are going to go through today are childhood, right? So that's from birth, infancy, to age 12. And Susan put in the chat, what do you know about recovery capital? Please jump in and answer, and we'll talk about that at the end. Adolescents that's the ages of 13 to 17, and we'll get into that. Young adults, ages 18 to 25. Adulthood, which is 25 plus, and then we're going to go to aging parents. And that's just what we put together for the lifespan that we see, and we're dealing with a lot at our agency, because we deal with all lifespans at South Florida Wellness Network from beginning to end. We've been able to really hone in and cultivate an agency that deals with every member of the family. Okay, so that has been a true blessing for us. So anybody know about recovery capital? What that is? Yes. So it's really about building your assets and resources for your recovery. Yes, thank you, Jill. It's a holistic look at many components in our lives that help us recover and heal. Community, family, social support. Correct. It's person-centered, it's holistic. Thank you so much.
I also want to just add to that, Rachel, if I can, and then,
Yes.
ask us if we can go back to childhood. But when I think of recovery capital, a lot of times when we think of capital, we think of what's our wealth. And in regards to healing and navigating through our experiences, it's really looking at what are the assets that we have in our life that are considered to be our strength that we bring to the table, right? What areas of our life that we have a lot to look at, whether it's physical, whether it's spiritual, whether it's financial, whatever it is that we have. Is there areas in our life that maybe we're deficient on? Maybe we need a little bit of extra support. What is it that we're looking at with our families when we're thinking of, especially working with families that have children in the childhood, right? So when we have families that are 0 to 12, we think about some of the challenges and the experiences that they may be having, whether it be the early signs of maybe some social and emotional development things that are happening, whether it's in early learning centers, or if we're starting to get calls from the elementary school teachers, or things that may be taking place. What is it that we're doing to intervene, and what type of supports are available in the school setting to actually support parents and be able to give them and strengthen what they need in order to provide the support to their children and even their siblings that are in the household, because we know that sometimes they may not be the specific one that may be having the experiences, but because most of the focus may be going on to one of their siblings, it makes it a little bit more challenging. So when we look at that and we start assessing that with families, we can say, we notice that your recovery capital over here may need some strengthening. Are you open to working on some different tools and coping mechanisms to actually kind of build that? And then you can work on goals, because one of the things that we find when we're providing support to families, no matter what stage that they're in, oftentimes they may be in, I don't want to say crisis, because crisis is defined based on the circumstances and everybody defines it very differently, but they may be in some challenging times where they may need some additional support. And what are we doing to facilitate that support, and how are we connecting them? And that's really what I think about when I think about the stages of the lifespan and how we build up families, because oftentimes we forget about that. And I say that respectfully, because as a person in recovery, oftentimes the family component is not included, and it's like an ancillary service when really it should be the core of the services that are being provided, because they are involved across the lifespan of their
Right.
children. And so I just really want to, really highlight that, because, and I've had to really even stretch myself to say, like, I too need to look at things when I'm providing support to my children across their lifespan. And so I think it's really super important that we start helping families really look at, because I think families are the champion, right? And so when we look at that, we're stretched very thin. And what are families doing for self-care when there isn't time for it? And that's super
Right.
important. So I just really wanted to highlight that, most specifically for, early childhood, because that's really going to set the stage of prevention and early intervention. And I think that we miss that oftentimes because we spend so much time in the chronic acute care.
Yes. Yes. And I think you're correct there, Susan. And that is why the foundation of childhood, infancy up is key, right? This is foundational. So this is a stage at which, growth, where we're setting the foundation for the child's growth, and not just physical growth, emotional and cognitive and everything else. So what are the key needs that we need to do and work with our parents at this stage that we may serve, right? Stability, we want them to have nurturing environments, routine and encouragement for the children, and of course, to help them hone in on their curiosity and creativity. So if we're supporting families, we want to help our parents with that. And as Susan said, sometimes when we are encouraging certain challenges made, it could be developmental, it could be mental health, whatever it is, our parents we as human beings can get stuck in looking at one piece, because we're dealing with a lot of fear at that time, but we're not seeing that we can really work on a creative, more positive spin on how we're handling stuff. And I think a part of that is building our resiliency and making sure that we have a community and some kind of support. And that's what, as peer support specialists, that's what we have to help our families to build, right? It's to help them provide consistent love and structure and positive discipline and early education support. One of the evidence-based practices that we use in our agency to help parents with that is a parent cafe. And we have it once a month. Before COVID, we had it was to be in person. After COVID, it ended up being on Zoom, but it has actually helped us to capture parents all over. I have parents that hop on from Texas, parents here in Broward County. And it really helps us to grow our protective factors, realize what stage we're at, and work on honing in and growing those protective factors for our parents. I have young moms in recovery that get on and they love it. And they're working on their recovery, but they're also raising little babies and little ones, at different stages. So So here we have the school system, the justice system, the behavioral health system, and the healthcare system. These are just a few of the systems that we may encounter if we have youth that we're going to be dealing with any kind of intervention and supports we may need. So we know our children are going into the school system, and I think it's very important as us as parents to try and get involved there at an early stage. I remember when my kids were little, I went in with them in the beginning. I introduced myself. If anything came up for volunteer, I would volunteer. So they knew me. So I would say, you know, if anything happens with my kids, please give me a call. And I got involved. And I think parents that are able to, it's not always a possibility, but being involved is very helpful for our children, right? And it helps us to be able to advocate for them if anything is going on, and to teach them also to have their own voice, right? The healthcare system also will be taking our kids to pediatric visits or doctor's visits if our children at that stage have any kind of assessments or evaluations that may be needed, right? The behavioral health system. And here, I had debated putting the justice system here. I would have usually put it at an older stage, but recently in our community, we've had justice systems in this stage between 0 to 12. How is that looking for you guys across the country? Are you seeing justice systems in earlier where you are? In Florida, we're seeing children in different stages from ages 4, 8, being Baker acted and getting into the system of care. What does that look like for you guys?
And I think, Rachel, if I can even say to take it a step further, right? Because I do believe that families have a lot of credibility, which gives to a lot of opportunity, right? So
Yes.
where the family technically, the only thing that makes it really, really good. So like, if I come in and I identify as a person in recovery, I have to build equity because I have like this scarlet letter on my name. However, on the family side, there's some equity and some credibility because they look at them as champions, right? So we can use that leverage and that privilege that we have to transform some of these systems that we're seeing it more, because I'm seeing it in the chat that yes, unfortunately there is, and there's consequences where in Florida, in many of our communities, at least in the communities that we're in, we have therapeutic courts, where in
Right.
some other states and spaces, they don't have therapeutic courts. So children and youth at very young ages are being criminalized for infractions that should be diverted into some kind of care. So I do think that we have opportunity, but I also think as families, we need to collectively think about who is the network that we're working with, and is there a coalition locally that we can get involved in so that way we can help define some of these laws and these infractions that are criminalizing our children.
Fantastic point, Susan. And that's why we need to really, you know, keep reading and keep abreast of what is happening and trending, right? In your county and your state legislation, what's happening with the bills and the laws for our youth. So we're going to talk about adolescents 13 to 17. And I think a lot of parents think that this is like one of the hardest stages that they go through. But it's funny because I find this stage to be, it can be challenging, but I've also seen growth and beauty in this stage. Recently, I transferred down to our South location, which is made up of youth and families. And it's been really amazing to be able to see the youth that come into our center and have found a safe space to be in at our South location. You know, this is a stage at which our youth begin to do more, have more increased risk taking, right? There's more peer influence. Some of our youth at this stage have more onset of mental health and substance use challenges. What does that look like? Do we as parents know what that looks like? Are we discussing stuff with the teachers? You know, I remember early on with my loved one, when he was going through his challenges, right away I saw a difference, right? He became more alienated. For someone who was very family, he started to try and isolate more. So there are little signs that we can look for as parents and understand, and become kind of more curious with our youth, right? And ask questions, but not in a interrogative manner. And I can tell you, for some of us from some cultures, I can share with you, I'm English and Jamaican. Sometimes we can come across quite rough as parents. So I had to really learn that our culture, my culture, is a huge part of who I am. And I think we have to also be open to knowing that for us that immigrate to the US and come here, we're raising our kids here, but some of us are raising our kids with our old ways of how we were raised in a different country, in a different time. How do we change that, right? How do we assimilate and make it that we're raising our child here? We need to know what the culture is here. We need to see how we can adapt, because change and growth means adapting. And that was something that I had to grasp when I had to realize that my parenting style of being it's my way or the highway was not working for my youth that processed differently. It just didn't work. So, and this is me being transparent and sharing with you that I really had to change some of my ways of parenting. And then there's importance of autonomy and confidentiality. You know, for a lot of us, this is a stage that we get fearful at, because we don't want our kids arrested, and we don't want them with the wrong kids out on the street and drinking and driving and smoking. And but we also have to give leeway for growth and having conversation about, you know, what are they dealing with? Because I can tell you now, when my young adults share what they were going through at that stage, I had no clue. And I was seeing them every day and picking them up from school, but they weren't telling me certain things of what was going on in school. So it's about having open conversation and letting our youth know you can share. This is a safe space. I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to go mad, get mad. Talk to me and tell me what's going on. Would anybody like to share on that?
I think this is a difficult stage anyway, because, aside from the peer pressure and the climate of things, and oftentimes the youth that we get to work with, as many of us work for nonprofit organizations, many of the youth also have different types of environmental things that are going on, including, trauma or single parent households and different types of other things that they're navigating, aside from their own struggles, right? And we already know that the isolation that was contributed by COVID has changed things, but they also, social media has also changed things. And we can have a debate about that, because sometimes people definitely think that social media is helpful and other people think it's not helpful. And it just depends. And I know one of the things that I have found most helpful to me as a parent is really listening to other youth. And because I've had the privilege and the opportunity to be honored enough to be in the presence of young people and to listen and to be able to process sometimes with young adults and say, I'm going through this thing with my young person. They're like, that's not helpful. Don't do that. And I'm like, okay, well, what should I do? Young people know what they need just like we do, but oftentimes they're not given the credibility. And so we often don't listen to them. And especially if they're our young people, right? We definitely don't
Right.
listen to them. So it's easy to give a parent support when you're not living in their household. But are you really fulfilling those same things that you're telling other parents to do? And that's one of the things that really helped me when I was doing family support is I didn't want to tell a parent that what worked for me was this if I really truly wasn't doing it. And this is where I think that family support is just like peer support, right? It aligns with the
Mhm.
same type of things, authenticity, transparency, all of the same core fundamental basis. And that's why I love it. And I love the fact that people in recovery are partnering and acknowledging families are in recovery too, because it has definitely been a challenge for
Mhm.
me as a parent and as a parent of adult children that still are having experiences, right? Because we know that youth with experiences are going to be adults with experiences. And I use the term experiences because I try not to label and I don't want to label my children. I know for some people it's really super important, but when I say experiences, it usually has to do with the plethora of labels that they have been given, whether it's anxiety or bipolar or whatever. At the end of the day, they're my
Mhm.
kids. And I remove that label because I still want to love them and still process through with them. So that's just my 2 cents because I definitely think that we need to figure out how to have healthier conversations.
Definitely. I agree with you there, Susan. And that is one thing that as you said, working with somebody with their own lived experience and hearing them out is one of the most not just edifying things that I have been able to do, but one of the most rewarding because it is reciprocity, right? Although we're sharing our lived experience, they're sharing theirs. I have gained so much in return. And as you said, learning from the youth, that has been the most beautiful thing, is learning from youth. There's one of the support groups that we've put on here is with parents and youth, but not necessarily their youth, right? They're coming to this support group and they're hearing other youth, and they then talk about stuff with a youth peer support specialist, an adult family support partner, and parents and youth. And it has been a really beautiful intermingling and learning process for both the parents and the youth. And it's a group in Spanish. It has been fantastic. The parents have really come out and said, wow, I now understand certain things. Because we, as you said, we can learn from other youth, not just our own youth, right? And sometimes we're more apt to listening because that emotional tie is not there to that other youth. So you can pick up on a lot.
And I'm wondering, when you're thinking of family support and you start to see, maybe a parent comes in because they've heard something about either family cafe or mental health first aid,
Mm-hmm.
where are the resources for parents when they start to see the onset of mental health and substance use symptoms? Because oftentimes what's happening and what I see is whether it's juvenile justice,
Mm-hmm.
hospital setting, or whatever, by the time a youth
School.
gets some kind of support, they've already had multiple infractions. The parent is already at wits because they've had to take a lot of time off of work. I'm wondering what that looks like across, the globe, since we have a lot of people on here. How is it that you are engaging families? And
Right
I'm
in the
gonna,
chat, please
I'm,
let us know.
yeah, I'm gonna drop it in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Meeting families where they are without judgment. Mhm. Being the person that listens, that is so important. Strength-based language, yes, 100%. That's a good one, Carrie. Finding out what matters most to them, you know? So we're gonna move on and talk about transitioning to adulthood, the ages of 18 to 25. So at this age and stage, if we've had our youth have had any kind of, you know, shifting of their thoughts and their beliefs, their decision making, they're deciding about, do they want to work, do they want to go to college? Some may be aging out of foster care, some may be, you know, not knowing where to go and how to get their employment. There may be justice involvement. Also navigating legal adulthood, meaning, you know, if you have a youth that has been through systems of care, once that youth turns 18, and even in schools, that is it. As a parent, sometimes you cannot get the information that you would like. How do you deal with that from before, right? Speaking with your child about that beforehand, before they turn 18, depending on the relationship you have with your child, getting releases of information signed so you can then still communicate with schools or hospitals or whatever system of care it is that you want to talk about, right? At that stage, our youth are dealing with their self-identities and trying to grow into adulthood. And some of our youth between 18 and 25 are young adults and they can function and they're, you know, it's an exciting time for them. Others, it's stressful because there's a lot of fear. And for some youth, they talk about, well, when I turn 18, like 18 is this magical number that the day after they turn 18, all of this amazing stuff is going to happen. And how do we deal with that, right? What does that mean? Some of, you know, one of the things I think we have to make sure is, even in dealing with the parents that have youth in that age, is to offer guidance and resources. One of the things in the county that we're in, we have, I have to say, I think for Broward County, we have quite a lot of resources and places that we can get information from. Key needs at this stage, I think, are mentorship, getting our kids to have life skills, financial literacy. You know, they're going to be, you know, they'll need to know about credit and all kinds of things that maybe when we were younger, we didn't know at that age and stage, that I think they are more now in tune with, right? Things have changed in the last 20 years, and it's a different growth process in terms of what's available out there, what our young adults are seeing out there while they're navigating the system, right? We have to empower them and help them with their decision making, connect them to community supports and career resources. One of the resources we have here is individualized placement services for our young adults to be able to get employment navigation, right? Where and what do you want to do? Because they're still young, they're still thinking and trying to figure it out. Even if they're going to college or not, where do you want to work? What are your passions? What do you like? One of the things that I was speaking with one of our young adults is they've started a youth group here called Rise, right? Reclaim, ignite, self-advocacy, and educate and empower, I think. So I think it's very important for our youth to have places to go and people to be able to communicate with in terms of connection and having a connection to healthy supports.
I think this is one of the most critical stages. And the reason why I say that is because oftentimes, number one, most diagnoses, a lot of the diagnoses that children or young people get under the age of 18 are different, and they don't just transfer over as an adult. Some do, some don't, depending upon what they are. And then healthcare changes, right? And what happens is, and I experienced this, and it was so challenging, not just for me, as a mom who wanted the care for my child, but it was very difficult for my child who needed the care, who didn't fully understand how to navigate that system themselves. And now they're 18 and they are an adult, I guess, but but really they're still struggling and they need that support. But they also are due the autonomy and the privacy and things that some of them do want. But there's like a fine line, and this is where oftentimes I think we haven't made that complete connection, and where young people kind of fall off, especially those that are not as able to navigate their own healthcare. And so making sure that whether there's a healthcare proxy or a surrogate, or we're having those conversations, whether we're working with our transitioning young people or our aging parents, because that's when care lapses. And I think that when care lapses, that's when those are critical moments that oftentimes we as family members don't know until we have to know. And
Right.
so I think setting those things up is really super important and scary, because I'm like, wait a minute, you can't do that. I need to be involved in it. But at the same time, I also need to learn to help my young person navigate their own healthcare starting from the age of 16, 17. So when they get into 18, we either have that proxy in place or they understand a little bit how to advocate for themselves. And that's where I think that there's a gap in sometimes what we do as families, at least for
Yeah.
me. At least I'll say it from my perspective, because it's hard. And I definitely didn't need a gap in care for my.
Right. And that's where I think as we've come in our family department, we've had to navigate parents through that in getting them ready for when their child turns 18 and they won't be privy to certain things. That's conversations that we've had to have, and they just don't understand at all. They're like, but he's my child. Yes, he's still your child, but legally there may be a barrier. Now, what do we do? So thank you, Maria, for saying that. In New York, you have clinics that have youth and family peer advocates to provide individual support. NAMI has lots of supports for young adults. And then there's Youth Act, to name one. Very cool. Thank you.
And I think that's wonderful too. And I think, for youth peer support, it's funded, right? Family support is not funded the way it should be. And, you can't bill Medicaid for it, and you can't do a lot of things like that. And that's where I think that we need to really expand upon that, because I think that families are a critical part of this process for our youth and young adults and even adult children, that it needs more funding. But I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. But, I think
Yeah.
it's how do we get that message across, and how do we make a call to action when we're thinking about that?
Yeah, that is it. Oh, in Utah, Amy's saying they can bill Medicaid in Utah. Oh, I need to call and find out how we got that done in Utah. Family care specialists can bill Medicaid. And in New York City in certain programs. Good to know.
That's great.
Yeah, very good to know. Florida, we're special. Okay. So, adulthood now, age 25. this is where we're going to talk about long-term recovery and resilience, independence. Like this is real adult now, getting up to family role and how the role is going to shift, and then crisis planning. So, I think here our youth are establishing careers, right? They're establishing more long-term relationships. I don't even want to say families, but beginning of their own families. And hopefully they'll be establishing long-term stability, because if they've had certain challenges earlier on and they're in recovery, and prayerfully getting the right supports, connection, they'll be able to work on their long-term stability. So work-life balance is a key need at this stage, their emotional wellness, financial planning, and having healthy relationships, right? As parents at that stage, we're still there to communicate, but more, as Susan had said, like, kind of stepping backward, but I'm still here if you need support or a conversation, a listening ear. I have to say that I am very blessed to say that I can now have certain conversations with my youth, and it's like we're three adults in the same household, right? And we can have adult conversations, and it's amazing. I don't just love them as children, I like them as people. So I think that's a stage that we all want to get to, right? That, hey, you're cool, you're nice. I'm proud, I love that. So, and what challenges do we deal with at adulthood at 25? For some young adults, it's, they do feel burnout, they have relationship conflicts, right? Financial stress and parenting challenges. So I think at that stage for us, we're coming into, then we'll talk about aging when we get to aging parents. But I know for me, at that stage, when my kids got to 25, then, it was they're aging, I'm aging, and then I'm now having, my parents are aging. So we're getting to a whole different dynamic. Susan, you want to add anything?
I was off mute. No, I think you pretty much covered it. Obviously, I think adulthood, can look different depending upon what stage they are in recovery. Because, as we know, whether it's attributed to psychotropic medication, extreme acute care services, anything that may cause any different abilities that they may have, although they may present one age and number, but it doesn't
Right.
necessarily mean that emotionally or mentally they're at that age and stage of their life. So
Right.
really understanding that, one, as a parent, or as a family support partner, is we want to set the family unit up for success if they think that their young person should be able to do these things because other people are, is really super important to reassure, especially the families that we're providing support to, because oftentimes we see that, and sometimes parents compare, not intentionally, or
Right.
hurtful. We just do because we don't have any other basis for it, right? And all children are different. I have
Right.
enough of them to know that not one of them are the same. They may
Right.
have some similar characteristics, but really looking at what long-term recovery and resiliency and even independence may look different for one than another, because I've shared it before, where I have a child that may live with me for the rest of their life, but they are still, to me, independent because they are buying their own groceries and have their own car and have their own job, but they may not just be living on their own. So the
Correct.
definition of any of these words are relative to the actual individuals and the family unit, and recognizing that sometimes our roles shift, and to be very open to not just crisis planning, but more so wellness planning, you know,
Mhm,
with the expectation that there are going to be disruptions along the way.
mhm.
And, you know, wellness looks very different. And we've moved a lot, as you know, Rachel, and we've talked about this. We've moved from illness, which means I don't have to do this alone, to
Right,
wellness because we can do this together, right?
right.
And so when we take out the I and we change it to we, then it becomes more wellness driven. And that's kind of my approach to adulthood and long-term sustained recovery and what it looks like for the individual.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Thank you. And that's something that I do share. We do share with our parents is that comparison is the thief of joy. We're not comparing anything. That's one thing that we really have to, I think, take stock of and move away from. Um, and to kind of validate and, you know, celebrate the little victories and the little wins for our family members, no matter what stage and age they are at, right? Let us be positive and really celebrate where they're at.
Yeah.
And us as family members, that's a part of our journey is shifting our expectations and accepting what is. I think that is one of the largest parts that once we can harness that, we can really learn and grow. Is that what you expected and what is maybe two different things? And how do you accept what is, right? Like having a family member that will live with you for the rest of your life and giving him autonomy and giving him the respect due and loving that person and meeting them where they're at.
Well,
So,
and I think if I can just add to this, because we didn't include this in this, we haven't even touched on harm reduction. And harm
oh yeah,
reduction is something that is often left out of this discussion because it's hard to understand, right? And most people attribute harm reduction to substance use disorders. I look at harm reduction across whatever, just life, right? Because we can reduce the harm for mental health challenges as well, you know, when we're looking at, you know, whether it's medication assisted recovery in mental health or medication assisted recovery in individuals with substance use disorder, which are also technically considered to be a mental health diagnosis. So when we look at these things, we have to look at how are we reducing the harm to individuals so that way they can live a healthy life for them, right? Not what we define as healthy, but what
correct.
their hopes and dreams are. So really not minimizing the fact that harm reduction should be a conversation amongst families, whether it's substance use or non-substance
Or
use,
right, right.
because we want to reduce the harms to individuals. So I just wanted to make sure to add that on there.
Yes,
We have about 7 minutes, Rach, so I don't know if you want to tie it up and
yes.
then leave a few minutes for questions and answers.
So we're going to talk about aging parents. So, here, Susan and I can both relate to this because we have young adult kids, and we have aging parents. So we're that sandwich generation, right? We're stuck in between. And we have to also learn at that stage that we're caring for sometimes young adults, and we're caring for our aging parents. How do we take care of ourselves? I think self-care here is very important. So there has to be, us reflecting and maintaining. We have to adapt to changes for independence for our parents, provide compassionate care, safety, make sure that we ensure safety and dignity for our parents, and how to also navigate their healthcare at the same time. So for some of us that have had to navigate healthcare systems for our youth, it's not as a tedious task because now we understand in how to do that, right? So challenges are role reversal. We are now caregiving to our parents who once cared for us, right? How do we do that respectfully? Would anyone like to talk about if that's impacting them now at this stage? Okay, so now we're going to talk about some of the key navigation skills that we need and have used, right? So there's system awareness and understanding the systems of care that we may be dealing with. Learn the structure and purpose of each system. So just as I said, if we're dealing with systems of care for our aging parents, we may be dealing with Medicare, we may be dealing with insurance companies, with rehabilitative companies, end of life care, and then communication and advocacy. To really practice listening, I think is very important, and learning not just to self-advocate for ourselves, but also listening to our parents. One thing I have dealt with recently in my aging parents is that for a lot of people, when they get to the 80s and 90s, people don't listen to them and they're not talking to them directly. If you go in as a family member with your aging parent, they're talking to you like your family member isn't there. And I have to say to the doctor, my mom's right here. She can hear, she can talk to her, right? So we have to have respect and person first, strength-based language, right? Understanding the difference. And understanding the difference, I think, between being assertive and aggressive. Because at some certain stages where we're tired, we may be overwhelmed, we need to learn how to assert ourselves without being aggressive, right? That can be. And also identifying what resources we have in our community and which ones we're going to use. And I think, for us in peer support and in our community, we have a lot of resources. It's talking to other people, garnering where to get resources from, and speaking to people and seeing, who have you used, what do you think, getting some feedback. Cultural and development awareness. So I spoke about culture earlier. I think that this is a large part of the dynamic here, especially in South Florida, in the whole of the US, is learning different cultures and learning how to be respectful, and especially for aging people. I think their culture is a huge part of what they have to deal with, and meeting them where they're at. And of course, problem solving and decision making. Where are we on that course? Could you all drop one word in the chat that describes what resilience means to you? To overcome, to be strong and flexible, to bounce back, to adapt, emotional regulation, how to thrive. I love that. Standing firm. Love it. So thank you. So our core elements of resiliency building are connection. We have to have safe, trusting relationships that offer support. Coping skills are learning healthy ways to manage our stress and emotions. As somebody put in the chat, regulate emotions. Our confidence, believe in one's ability to adapt and grow through challenge. And purpose, meaningful roles and goals that sustain motivation. And our community, access to supportive networks, culture, and shared values. So how can we strengthen resiliency in the people we serve and within ourselves?
And that's just something that we leave you with. It's not anything that you need to put in the chat. It's just something to reflect about, because as family support partners, as leaders of organizations, as advocates, and all of the above, we encourage you all to continue to keep standing strong and doing the work that you do, but really reflect on what is it that we can do to strengthen that resiliency in the people that we serve, and also in ourselves. All right, it's 2:45. There are the national
Thank you so
resources.
much.